As promised last year, we extended this year's sailing trip in Aegean to 14 days. But instead of turning back against the meltemi, we sailed southwest from Milos towards the Peloponisos and then north along its western coast. We made it all the way to the end of the Argolic Gulf, visited Nafplio, and finally returned toward Athens across the Saronic Gulf. There's so much to share about anchorages, winds, unique bays, and fascinating places. That's why this journey is split into 3 videos. The first part covered the preparations, the leg-by-leg route to Milos, and time spent exploring the island. This is part 2, marked by a long passage, some incredible fishing luck, and even a day of waiting the strong winds to calm down. Destination. In the first part, we sailed from Athens to Milos, and we took a full day off to explore the island. In this second part, we'll cross from Milos to Elafonisos, then continue north up to Argolic Gulf to the town of Nafplio. So this time we are heading from Milos to Elafonisos, passing Cape Malayas, often called the Cape of Good Hope of the Mediterranean. Then we'll sail back towards Monemvasia and finally to Nafplio, the biggest town we visited on this journey. Weather. Or more precisely, the wind plays a major role in deciding when, where, and if at all we can sail. We can't change the final destination because the boat has to be returned on time, but we can plan to wait a day or 2 if needed. And of course we allowed some buffer days just in case. When you're sailing longer distances without many safe harbors nearby, a reliable forecast is essential. I check the forecast several times a day, at least 3 times. I use the Windy app, which lets me compare different weather models for the same area. That's important because the forecasts can vary from model to model. But when all of them agree, you can usually trust the prediction. We were lucky with our long passage. The meltemi wind has come down a day earlier and the waves had dropped to about a meter or less. But we weren't so lucky in the days that followed. Logistics. If you haven't seen part 1, we chartered the sailboat through our usual trusted provider. We flew into Athens and from the airport it was very easy bus ride to Piraeus. Just hop to the X96. We spent the first night in a hotel nearby the marina. After picking up the boat and doing all the provisioning, we spent 4 days sailing, with stops in Anavisos, Kitnos and Serifos, before arriving on Milos, where this part of our story goes on. Day 6. Milos to Elafonisos. The day started very early. We set off at first light, with a long crossing ahead of us. As we passed Milos, the morning sun greeted us, along with a decent bit of swell and gusty winds that change speed and direction often, especially in the lee of the island. Later on, the wind became more stable, but in the second half of the day it got too weak and we had to motor. We saw just a few other boats along the way. The sea was mostly empty until we got close to Cape Maleas. Just a few miles before the cape, we got our first real fish bite. After a 30-minute battle, and of course the fish took the weakest rod, we almost landed it. It was even already inside the net, but slipped away at the last second. We comforted ourselves by saying it was probably too big anyway. But the real fishing stories were still ahead. Late in the afternoon, we kept our distance from Cape Maleas, which is known for its rough gusts. And just before sunset, we dropped anchor at our planned spot in front of the famous Simos beach on Elafonisos. Day 7, a day off on Elafonisos. This rest day went by quickly. A bit of swimming, some beach wandering. By the evening, the bay started to fill with some pretty large waves, so we quickly decided to move the boat to the other side of the island, to the inner bay. That side isn't well protected from northerly winds, but since the forecast was calm, we went for it. And just as we rounded the island, we caught our second fish, smaller this time, but big enough to turn one-course dinner into a two-course one. Day 8, Elafonisos to Monemvasia. Double tuna strike. It was just a 6-hour sail, so we didn't rush in the morning. As we neared Cape Maleas again, we passed a massive Russian oil tanker, according to the IS, headed to Croatia.
In front of Malaya, with predicted north winds, full sails is never a good idea.
Just like always, waves building, big ship approaching, and suddenly, both rods bent, both. So, 2 fish on at once. And as it turned out, 2 tunas, both over 20 kilos. We landed the first one and safely released it, The lure came out clean. The second fish wasn't so lucky. It had swallowed the hook deep, so releasing it wasn't an option. It would die anyway. Well, for the next 5 days our menu was 100% tuna, in every shape and style you can imagine. After a few more hours of sailing, we reached Monemvasia. The forecast said strong northerly winds would pick up the next morning. We figured we'd be safe on the outer wall until then, since the inner harbor was already full. But the wind picked up much earlier, so we moved into nearby Palaia Bay to wait it out. As it turned out, we had to stay there the entire next day. Day 9. Palaia Monemvasia. Our decision to move last night turned out to be a wise one. Strong winds hit during the night, and even in the shelter bait we measured gusts up to 37 knots. But the anchor with 80 meters of chain in 9 meters of depth plus a good snubber line held perfectly. Another sailboat joined us later. We had seen them in the inner harbor the day before. So clearly, we weren't the only ones looking for the better shelter. By the evening, the wind started to ease. Tomorrow we'll try our luck in the open waters again. Day 10. Palaia, Gerakas, Nafplio. The wind has calmed down a bit, but it was still blowing, of course, from exactly the direction we were heading. To make it worse, we were still facing some serious waves. After just under 2 hours, we stopped for breakfast in Gerakas, a unique little place sometimes called the Peloponnesian Fjord. It's shaped like a fjord, but it's much shallower, and the holding is bad due to the hard rocky bottom. Several boats had taken shelter there. We continued sailing along the steep eastern coast of the Peloponnese, an area that reminded us to the mountain ridges back home. As the day went on, the waves settled, the wind eased, and by the afternoon we were sailing in the flat current. Later in the day, we reached Nafplio. There, we had an interesting little episode with the harbor master. Even though we had already paid for our berth and had a receipt to prove it, another woman came later demanding we pay again. Of course, we didn't. Luckily, we had receipt from the first marinero. Apparently, different groups have different claims to the pier. Go figure. For the next morning, we rented a car, which turned out to be cheaper than taking a taxi to Mykenae. In the evening, we explored the old town and made a stop to a local taverna to break a tuna taste. Costs. If you didn't catch part 1, we paid about 3,000 euros per week for a 3-cabin sailboat, plus roughly 800 euros for food and supplies. Tavern visits costs around 25 euros per person, even one drink included. Berth in Milos, 18 euros for 2 nights. Car rental on Milos, 100 euros. In this second week, we paid 5 euros for short-lived berth in Monemvasia, where we didn't even stay due to the worsening weather conditions. 60 euros for a car rental in Nafplio, and 25 euros for docking in Nafplio. The priciest marina of the trip, but cheaper for car rental. The sailboat. Our boat this year was a Sun Odyssey 419 with 3 cabins, very well equipped and exceptionally maintained, almost like a privately owned boat. It could have used one more solar panel, but everything else was up to standard. For its size, it was very spacious. The cockpit easily seats more than 6 people. The only downside tied to the boat size was the speed. Comparing to last year 490, this one was clearly slower. Even surfing down a wave, we barely hit 7 knots, and our average was below 6. On the plus side, safety was clearly a priority. The boat had over 80 meters of chain.
We have 80 meters.
80 meters.
A life raft, an EPIRB. Plus, we got two floating 50-meter ropes for shore mooring.
Two yellow lines.
2 yellow lines, floating lines, 50 meters.
Conclusion. We had expected this part of the trip to be less windy, but in the end it was here that we needed to take a full rest day because the wind was too strong. Weather is unpredictable. You have to plan for delays and always have backup anchorages in mind. A schedule is important, sure, but what matters even more is doing your homework on the sailing area and learning as much as you can about local conditions. Without experiences, without my great sailing guidebook and all those YouTube tips, it would have been hard to make a trip like this. This brings the second part of our Greek sailing adventure to a close. But there are still some challenges waiting for us in the final stretch. I hope you found this video interesting and above all, full of useful information, and that it made you curious to watch the next one. Before we wrap things up, let me invite you to check out the final video. You'll find the link on the end. We'll visit the ancient site of Mykene, spot some dolphins, head to Porto Heli with picturesque half-sunken ship, then over to Dokos, from there past Hydra, where we found a perfect little anchorage for next year, and finally to Aegean, when we almost ran aground in the port. Will we go again? Not only that we will go, but even you can join us next year. Next year we are planning a 4 or even 5-week cruise with a cabin or 2 available each week for anyone who wants to join. Crew changes will happen in Milos, Nafplio and maybe Poros or even Piraeus. For more info, feel free to contact me and follow my videos where I'll explain everything in detail. You can also check my Facebook profile Ventus Waves Sailing in Greece. I'm really grateful for your audience, for your likes, your subscribes and your general support. Please feel free to check out my other videos and don't forget the first and the third part of our Greek sail if you haven't seen them yet. Thank you again and see you soon. Bye!